Welcome everyone to the Cohn Zohn podcast. It's been a couple weeks since we did one of these, and since then, our lives have changed a little bit. I used to write for the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat. I covered the 49ers for 9 years. Now I write for Sports Illustrated, and we may have some new viewers, people that haven't seen this before. So we'd like to introduce ourselves. I'm doing this with my dad, Lowell Cohn. Dad, who are you?
I'm your dad. I'm Lowell Cohn. I'm retired, former sports columnist at the San Francisco Chronicle and the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat. And Grant, well, I'll say one other thing. My son's name is Grant Cohn, but everybody who's close to him always calls him Iggy. So I mean to call him Grant in our podcast, but I'm going to slip into Iggy, so just understand.
That's fine. And I want to say one other thing. My dad says he's retired, but he just wrote a book, and it's coming out in May. It's called Gloves Off, and it's about 40 years of sports writing in the Bay Area. It's about 60 to 70 short stories that are amazing and a riot, and you should order it right now on Amazon.
Well, thank you, Iggy.
Dad, what are we talking about today?
You know, the draft is coming up, and I understand that next week on your SI.com 49ers site, you'll be talking all draft. But I've always been interested in people.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little bit more than the games. I've been interested in the people, the Bill Walsh, Don Nelson, Frank Robinson. And I'd like to talk to you about some of the key characters in the continuing drama of the 49ers that you cover and I observe. Some of them I haven't met. Most of them I haven't met because I've been retired now 3 years. So let's start. Let's start at the top at the 49ers. What is your impression of John Lynch? What kind of person? What's his personality like? And when you're done with him, I have insight into him.
Sure. I've covered Lynch for a few years. He strikes me as a stand-up guy. He's the kind of guy who not only can you walk over to him at any time during a practice around the facility, he'll walk over to you. He'll make eye contact with you and walk over to you and shake your hand and say, "Hi, Grant, how are you? How's your dad?" He's a mensch. You could say he's a politician, but he seems so genuine. He's a terrific face of the organization. And he seems to have a not much of an ego in his job. Like Trent Baalke, for example. Trent Baalke would draft players and force them on his coaches because he felt he knew players better. Lynch is a borderline Hall of Fame player who knows players. But he's not going up to Robert Saleh or Kyle Shanahan saying, "This guy in the second round is perfect for you." He would never do that. He would defer. And I think that's a microcosm of who he is.
I knew him when he was a young man at Stanford, when he played defensive back at Stanford for the 1992 season. I wrote a book about that season. And I have a chapter in my book on John Lynch. I spent a few hours with him. I mean, I knew him on many occasions, but we sat down for a one-on-one interview one day, and my impression of him was massively intelligent, Stanford undergraduate, the most charming and sophisticated 21 or 22-year-old. I didn't reach that level of sophistication till 50.
Yes.
Easygoing, not a complicated person. Very bright, but not a complicated person. And I'm going to say one other thing about him, a winner.
No question.
John Lynch is a winner.
I mean, let's go through his history.
Yeah.
He was a big deal baseball player and got drafted to be a pitcher and almost went. Bill Walsh had to bring him into his office and show cut-up clips of John Lynch playing safety along with Ronnie Lott playing safety and saying, "John, you're making a big mistake."
Also, he wanted to be a quarterback. He had been a quarterback in high school.
He was a
and they had to convince him not to be a quarterback.
So he could have been a successful quarterback. Yeah.
Iggy, he turned out to be the superstar on that team, on the Stanford team that beat Penn State in a bowl game. So I'd say every step of his career, a winner.
Yeah. And I didn't you write in your book there was a big game he had against Notre Dame and Jerome Bettis where he pretty much won that game for the Cardinal?
Absolutely, and owned Jerome Bettis.
But again, one of the things about, before we move off of Lynch, you say winner. I mean, he was a winner as a baseball player, as a quarterback, as a safety, of course. And then he became a broadcaster and was great. Then finally he became a GM and had no experience. And when he got the job, I thought, this is hubris. This is finally someone who's never failed at anything, saying, I can do anything. I can do anything. And he's succeeding. It's quite remarkable.
Yes, I admire him. Now, again, I haven't spoken to him in a long, long time, but we liked each other when we were younger men, and I appreciate that he always says to you, "Say hi to your dad." He's a
You
good
call,
guy.
you called him easygoing and simple. He's a Californian.
He's a Californian, as opposed to me, for example.
Right.
I'm not easygoing or simple because I'm a
He
New
spends most of
Yorker.
his time in San Diego. I mean, that's a good place to be.
It's a wonderful place. Let's move on to the head coach, Kyle
Okay.
Shanahan.
Before I tell you what I think of Kyle, I'd be curious to hear what your impression of Kyle is from afar. You retired just before he started.
Right. So I've never met Kyle Shanahan, although I know his dad very well. Um, my impression of Kyle Shanahan is he is a brilliant play caller. When I say brilliant, he might be the best in the NFL right now. And I know that Andy Reid is in the NFL. He might be Kyle may be the most creative offensive guy that I've ever witnessed since Bill Walsh.
In terms
That's
of
how
play
much
design?
play design.
Yes.
Yes, play design and play caller at appropriate time
Sure.
in games.
Sure.
I have a caveat on that in a minute,
Of course.
but and you know what it is. But I would have to say brilliant. My feeling about him looking from afar is that he's a very inward person.
Yeah.
The way creative people are. Creative Scott Ostler, one of my best friends, is brilliant. He's inward
Yes.
because he's always living with his ideas and his jokes and things like that he wants to write. Well, Shanahan is always living with his plays. I believe he lives in a little football world. There's a football field in his head, and he's always designing plays. I don't think he can stop. He's a creative artist, so he's inward, which means I believe he's capable of being sociable, but it's not his default mode.
Was
I think
Walsh the same
it's
way?
not his. Oh God, yes. Walsh would be happy to sit in a room and draw plays all day long. So I think he's that way. I also think that he is so into his offense, he doesn't particularly want input from other people.
Yes.
And I think Bill Walsh was the same way. I think it's something a head coach needs to grow out of. For example, you've asked me, so I'm going to tell you. There are many reasons the Niners didn't take Tom Brady, and maybe it was correct not to take Tom Brady. I think among the reasons was, and this is just my surmise, Kyle would not want input from someone. Is Brady older than he is?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, from someone older, from someone who's won all those Super Bowls, from someone who was a Patriot. Brady might say, I don't like this play.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me. Now, I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo says that. So I think part of it may be that. And what I want to come back to Lynch. I say Lynch is not complicated. I think Kyle is very complicated.
Yeah.
And this is standing. I think he's a nice man, a good guy. I think he's a brilliant play designer and caller, except perhaps when the game is on the line. And people know,
Yeah.
like in 2 Super Bowls. And that's something he has to, if he can, work out. But I do think he's complicated and a loner.
It's interesting you compared him to or contrasted him to John Lynch. I think they're a really good pair. You know,
Yes.
John Lynch is extroverted. John Lynch wants to be the face of the franchise.
Yeah.
He wants to shake everyone's hand and get to know all the fans. And he can do that for Kyle. One thing I've noticed about Kyle that you would notice if you had covered him, which makes him stand out, he is extremely candid, blunt, and honest. Like,
yes.
Like with Harbaugh, you'd ask him a question about a player, and he'd lie to you. Like, what do you think of Alex Smith? He's great. Thanks, Jim. If you ask Kyle, what do you think of any player? He'll really tell you. It's like he can't lie to an extent. And I think the media gets a lot of that, but the players get it to the nth degree. I think he's extremely blunt and honest in meetings to players, to Jimmy Garoppolo, to everyone. And I think it kind of explains the personality of the players on the team. They can take it. They're not a lot of divas. They're coachable. They're low maintenance. I think a lot of young athletes these days are not that. They want to be told that they're the greatest and have been told that they're the greatest since they're 13. And his blunt honesty is a throwback. I mean, it's like the kind of stuff that he probably got it from John Gruden. John Gruden is known to be extremely blunt and honest with his players. And Shanahan broke into the league on the Bucks under John Gruden. So there's a bit of that, and I actually really, really respect it. If you ask Kyle Shanahan in a hallway, Kyle, what do you think of me? He'll tell you exactly what he thinks.
I could say from the point of view of a journalist, dealing with a head coach who's blunt and honest is a gift from God.
Yeah, it's like dealing with a boxer or someone from a whole different sport, because football is all about not telling you.
Right. It's about being obscure.
Yes.
I have to look at the film.
And in the NFL, no one is 100% transparent, but Lynch and Shanahan are probably the most.
Yes, and I would love to cover a team that had two people like that and that had players who stayed in the locker room when the media was there. In other eras, we would go in and it was a ghost city. The kicker would be there and that would be it, right?
Yeah, and it almost felt like Harbaugh was telling his players, like, look, I was a player. I hated talking to the media. I get it. Don't talk to him. Forget it. And what Lynch and Shanahan are doing is, no, guys, no. We're not going to be unnecessarily antagonistic. We're going to be real pros and win with class, which is the 49ers mantra. I like that.
Okay, let's move on to the defensive coordinator.
Okay, well, what do you think of Robert Saleh from afar?
Okay, again, I've not met Robert Saleh, but I have very definite feelings about him. And it's my feelings about how I feel about safeties and cornerbacks.
Yeah.
And you know where I'm going with this, Iggy. I've covered a lot of safeties and cornerbacks. I mean, Ronnie Lott, I covered pretty much his whole career. Away from the field, they are the kindest, most gentle, often God-fearing people. You know that, right?
Yes, and that's
Talk
solid.
to them, they look you in the eye, they answer honestly, they ask about how are you doing, they may even call you sir. Put them on the field and they become a metaphor, killers.
Yeah. Yes.
They have a different personality.
Yes.
Ronnie Lott, he was the sweetest guy.
Yeah.
Put him on a field, you would not want a wide receiver run over near him.
No.
He would knock you out. And I feel that way about Saleh. My impression of Saleh is he's an intellectual, he's thoughtful, he's articulate.
Chess player.
He's soft-spoken, but as a coach, he wants his guys to inflict damage. I don't mean unfair damage. He's within the rules, but to tackle hard.
Well, he has mantras. Extreme violence, all gas, no brakes. I mean, everything that he preaches is hit the guy as hard as you can. Run as fast as you can and don't slow down.
So, Iggy, is my impression of him as having two personalities like a defensive back accurate?
I think it is. He says, I've never seen with Dr. Jekyll, I've never seen Mr. Hyde. You see him get very excited and worked up on the sideline, but I think the way he tries to channel it, Shanahan can be blunt and almost negative, I think, with his comments. I think Saleh tries to be the opposite. He tries to be almost the good cop, like a teacher with constructive criticism for his play. I don't think he yells. I think he yells when he's happy and excited, but I don't think he criticizes. I'm not sure if Shanahan yells either, but Saleh tries so hard to be positive. He's like your favorite high school teacher, the guy you can't wait to go to his class because he's smart, he explains it well, but you also feel like he's on your side. He wants you to get an A. He's not trying to find ways to give you a D. You know, he's the teacher you dream of. That's the way I look at him.
Iggy, as a journalist, do you enjoy talking to Robert Saleh?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Although it's funny, sometimes I've noticed he can give people some real vague answers. If he doesn't really know you or doesn't really know where you're going with your question, he can give you nothing in a very nice way. But if he knows you a little bit and he knows kind of where you're going, he'll explain all of football to you. So I do appreciate him very much.
You know,
safe though. He's cautious.
Harbaugh was the same way.
Yes.
He would be cautious, but if he saw where you were going and you were worth it, he would explain all of football to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm not surprised that Robert Saleh, every time he gets an interview for a promotion, he either gets the promotion or is one of the finalists because he's extremely impressive. Even in a way that Shanahan isn't. Shanahan's extremely impressive too, but he kind of comes across as someone who is a wonk in one area. Saleh comes across as like a Renaissance man.
Oh, interesting.
You know, and it's like, again, Kyle grew up around it. So he's been like I grew up around journalism. He's been indoctrinated in it since he was 5 years old. Saleh pretty much is a self-made person.
Do you like Saleh?
I love Saleh. He's a great guy. I really, really, really like that guy. Yes.
Because I can tell you that when you're over at our house, I hope someday you can come here again.
Yeah.
When you're over at our house and you talk about Saleh, you grin.
Yeah.
You grin.
You know, I've met a lot of coaches in the NFL, and I've never met one as relatable and down to earth and genuine as him. Not to say that Vic Fangio's a bad guy, but a lot of these guys just really aren't interested in 30-year-old bloggers or whatever. And Saleh is as interested in the media as he is in his own players, which is remarkable. And the thing about him is he's always genuine. Anyway, should we do some players?
I'd love to.
I like doing you first. What do you think of Joe Staley? You guys go back.
I know Joe Staley very well. Okay, I'm going to start with a generic answer. Joe Staley is an all-time great left tackle. I mean, he is a great player.
Yeah.
And so I see him as representative of offensive linemen.
Yes.
And offensive linemen are the most normal players on any team, on any football team.
Yeah.
They're the grunts.
Yes.
They protect the quarterback and they take a lot of abuse. And they work as a unit as opposed to like a defensive tackle or a defensive end who's running in solo. I mean, of course they're coordinated, runs in solo and gets all the credit and waves his arms.
Yeah.
You don't really see offensive linemen doing that. They're choreographed.
Yeah.
So I see him that way. And as a result, offensive linemen, and this would describe Staley to a T, are normal, self-effacing, humble, reliable, polite, nice, people who you could talk to. They're highly intelligent, generally highly intelligent.
Yeah.
And they would ask about you.
No ego.
No ego.
Not the kind of people that crave FaceTime on television because they don't get it.
It's just irrelevant for them. Yeah. They're part of a group. And their identity.
They're not even really celebrities either. Like if Joe Staley walks down the street, Niner fans would know who he is, but most people wouldn't.
Right. So to me, he's a down-to-earth, I want to say, overwhelmingly likable person.
Okay.
That's how I feel.
I love that. Let me add to it, and you're gonna agree with this. But there is an edge to Joe Staley, like a dry humor.
Yes.
That is. I don't know if you remember this, but my first season on the beat was 2011. He must have been 26, something like that. He would talk at his locker a lot. He was one of the better players in the team, and we were both in Santa Clara one day, one of my first days down there, and Joe Staley mumbles. You know what I mean?
Yes.
He talks low and he mumbles.
He expects you to get in close to him.
Exactly. And you looked at that and you said, "I'm not doing that. I don't know this kid. I don't know why he's mumbling. I don't appreciate that he's doing that." And we both kind of wrote him off as like, he's got an ego. But then when you get to know him and you listen to those dry mumble, he's almost like Shaq. He's got a twinkle in his eye. And he's making little dry jokes every 15 seconds. And if you're really sticking with him, he's a riot. He's a lot of fun.
He's a riot. Yes.
Yeah. And it's almost like he's mumbling because it's like, you think I'm a dumb jock, don't you? You think I'm a dumb jock. I look like a dumb jock. I'm big. So I'll play into that stereotype, but then I'm going to surprise you and see if you're paying attention every 20 seconds. I love that about him.
Iggy, tell the story what happened between Joe Staley and me in Seattle.
Okay, so
you remember details better than I do.
Yeah. Remember, Joe Staley was crying after the Super Bowl loss. He takes these losses personally. When the Niners had Harbaugh as their head coach, they went to the Super Bowl. The next year, they went to the NFC Championship game again and played the Seahawks in Seattle. They were winning. They crumbled in the fourth quarter. And after the game, Staley was really upset. But we all went to him because he's the best talker on the team, and he's a leader, and he's available.
And he's the normative figure.
He's the normative figure. So, of course, we go up to him right away, and you're asking him questions. And Joe, who's always so poised and professional, just didn't have it at that moment. He was still angry. He was still in his uniform. He still had adrenaline going through him. And when you asked questions like, how does this feel right now? How does this loss feel right now? He's like, what do you think it feels? Like stuff like that you would never say. And everyone's like, well, okay, well, this isn't the Joe Staley we know. You're clearly going through a tough time. We'll just go to someone else, no problem. Everyone's allowed an off day, especially after such a crushing defeat. So we just move on and interview other people. Then we go to wait for Harbaugh to talk in his conference room. Staley walks all the way from the locker room to this conference room, sticks his head in, and I was thinking, like, is he angry at someone? Is he have something he wants to say? He says, Lowell, could you please come over here?
Yeah. I thought he was angry.
Yeah. And it's okay. You take it from there. Cause you guys went to a hall and I didn't see it after that.
Yeah. And I went out and I didn't know what to expect. And he said, Lowell, I was rude to you. I want to apologize. Please accept my apology. And then he said, the way I was so rude, that's not me. That's a direct quote. That's not me. I was so touched because you got to understand, players don't do that to writers.
Ever.
And I said to him, you have nothing to apologize for. My question may have been out of line. Joe, you're the best. We shook hands and that was it. But
if I'm not mistaken, he said, do the interview again.
You know what? I don't. He did. Yes.
I think he said, do the interview again. Ask the question. Let me give you a real answer.
He did.
He did.
He did.
Yeah.
Because he felt he's a gentleman, and also he's competitive. He wanted to do well.
Yeah. Other things about Joe Staley. A couple of years ago, when I was just a humble blogger, I was doing a story on breast cancer awareness in the NFL, and I was interviewing players who had parents that had breast cancer. Joe Staley's mom had breast cancer, and I asked him if I could interview him. He called me. We talked on the phone for like 20 minutes. This is one of the.
I never knew that.
He called me, and so again, he's one of the best players in franchise history, and he's normal. Yeah, he's a really nice guy. Also, he's one of the few players in a locker room who will remember journalists' names. He'll walk through and he'll say, "Hey, Grant, how are you?" I don't think
mind, right?
I don't think maybe Jimmy Garoppolo knows mine, but most of those players, actually, I don't know if they, but I assume they don't, or if they know it, they don't use it. I'll say that.
Iggy, they know your name.
Okay, maybe, but they don't use it most of the time. Anyway.
Right. You know what our name is? Hold on before you move on. Our name for the athletes is you guys.
You guys.
Right? Our name is you guys.
They'll say it too. Hey, you guys always do this and that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. You guys. That's our name.
Okay, what do you think of Sherman?
Okay. Again, I don't know him, but I've sure seen him in action a lot. Again, Stanford graduate, really, really a bright guy. I think he's maybe even brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that. And I'm going to use an adjective, polished.
Yeah, that's the right word. That's the right word.
Polished.
He's the most polished player I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's polished.
Quarterback.
What I mean by that is I think he already projects a media career.
Agreed.
And he'll be great.
Fantastic.
He's so articulate. He knows the game so well. So I think he tries very hard. And I admire this. By the way, this is not a criticism. I'm not saying he's a phony.
No.
I'm saying he tries very hard to get along with the media because he thinks he may be media one day. And we'll write nice stories about him. And it makes his life easier. If the media hates you, like Kaepernick, it doesn't make your life easy. It makes it hard.
Or like Barry Bonds. You want to get in the Hall of Fame?
Well, yeah, Barry Bonds.
Richard Sherman wants to get in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Now, Barry Bonds is not in the Hall of Fame, not because he was nasty. I don't vote him because I believe he cheated.
Right.
So it has nothing to do with his personality.
Right.
What I'm saying is, I think, talk about a politician. I think Richard Sherman is a politician. And I admire it, and I give him all the credit for it. What is he like to you, Grant?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. He's extremely polished, but all the ways that he is polished makes my job easier, which is weird because the reputation was that he was getting difficult with the media in Seattle. But when he comes here, it's like he wants to do exactly what John Lynch did, like maybe become a play-by-play guy. He'd be great at it. But, coaches, coordinators, and quarterbacks talk at the podium every week. No one else is required to. Richard Sherman wants to. He talks at the podium every Thursday like he's the quarterback. And it's helpful because he has a whole lot more to say than Jimmy Garoppolo. He is the voice of the team, and he embraces it. Not only does he talk on Thursdays at the podium, he'll talk on Wednesday at his locker. He'll go to his locker after he talked at the podium on Thursday and talk again. He'll sit at his locker and just hang out there. He'll answer questions for the television. He'll shoot the breeze with journalists who just want to get to know him. He's the most available superstar I've ever seen. And again, with the polish, I get the feeling that when the session is over and the media has to leave and he walks away, he looks to the players and say, see, that's how it's done. Right there.
And God love him.
God love him. He's a great example. Every player should be like that. I really enjoy covering him. I don't know how, he doesn't give off the same genuineness as Joe Staley, right? It's a much more premeditated thing, but I appreciate it very much.
I have a question about Sherman. Does he have a sense of humor?
Yes, he does have a sense of humor. Absolutely. He's not overly serious. Yes.
He would make you laugh.
You would really like him. And I think he would like you. Two Stanford guys. You could get him alone at his locker any day, and you guys would both really find each other interesting.
I like that.
He would listen. He's not the kind of guy who just likes to give speeches. He'd actually listen. Remember, he was a former fifth-round pick, and a lot of times those people, even if they achieve greatness, they remember who they were and that they weren't always so famous.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'd like to move on to Kittle.
Let's do Kittle.
You want me to go first?
You go first.
Okay. Again, this is observing Kittle from afar. I would say he plays with joy.
Like no one I've seen since Steve Young.
I was going to say the other one is Steve Young.
Yeah.
They take a hit and get up smiling.
Yes.
They love the footballness of football.
Yes.
And Iggy, it is such a pleasure to cover somebody like that.
Yeah, it seems almost rarer and rarer. A lot of people get into football because by 14 years old, they figured out that they were going to make millions playing it, and they were very good athletes. But
yes,
Kittle really loves it. He loves to block, and he's not even getting paid that much. He's getting about $500,000 a year to be the hardest working, hardest playing person in the league. It's a lot of fun to watch.
I would say he's the best player on offense. I thought Buckner was the best player on the team, but best player on offense, and my impression is he doesn't have much of an ego. He's like Joe Staley in that regard. He doesn't have much.
A little bit bigger of an ego than you would think, but it's cute. It's cute. He's always polite. If you go up to him on the wrong day and ask him to talk, he'll say no. He sees himself as like Hulk Hogan. He's in character. He knows everyone's looking at him, and he's funny, and he likes to put on a good press conference for the media. But he's just a little bit like a character. He would be great right now on WWF, and I wouldn't be surprised if when he retires, he actually becomes a WWF wrestler. He's into it.
Okay. I would like you to tell, you've told us before, but we may have a whole bunch of new people watching us. Tell the story about him in the car and you.
Okay. So I was telling you about players knowing your name and you don't know it. I'd never talked to George Kittle one-on-one. I didn't know he knew my name. I'm walking out of the 49ers facility to my car, and there are two different parking lots, one on the left, one on the right. I was talking to Josh Dubow, the AP. He was parked in one. I was parked in the other. So I was kind of lingering in the street, getting a few more words in before I crossed and went over there. So as I'm standing in the street, I hear a car zoom past me very fast. And then as it gets the red light up the street, I hear a voice yelling at me. I look, and it's George Kittle popping his head out of the passenger side window saying, "Grant, why are you standing in the street? That is extremely dangerous. I'm nervous for you. Please make better decisions, Grant." I don't know really what he was trying to communicate, but it was probably the cutest thing an athlete's ever done, and I really like him. So after the Super Bowl, when they lost, he played a great game. He had nothing to be upset about. He's trying to get to his post-game podium. You know how it can get real crazy after a Super Bowl. And I'm standing in his way, and he goes, "Grant, you're in my way again. How many times I got to tell you to be careful?" He was cracking jokes after they lost the Super Bowl. And I think that's appropriate because, again, he doesn't have anything to be ashamed of. He played well on that stage. And he's a silly guy.
He's a silly guy, but I'll tell you something. I was a journalist for a long time. He knew your name.
Yeah.
My guess is everybody in there knows your name. And I'm going to say why I think so. It's a very talented group that covers the 49ers. But you're the most demanding. You have the highest, I believe, the highest standards, and you write about them. You grade people tough, but fair. And I think there's a subculture there that said, what grade did Grant give you today?
Yeah.
And they know that. And I don't think they want to suck up to you, but they don't mind if you like them.
Right. And I want to say I was talking to a team source the other day, someone very close to the team. And this person was saying, Grant, you're not controversial. You are relentlessly pursuing the truth, and I respect that. So I think that's how they see me in the organization. I'm tough, and if whatever they tell me, I'm clearly not going to take at face value. I'm relentlessly pursuing the truth, but that's what I'm supposed to do as a journalist. It's the big leagues. They get it, and they appreciate it.
You know,
You didn't know that.
No, maybe later you'll give me a call and tell me who. I'd love to know who the source is.
Yeah, maybe I'll tell you who it was.
Maybe. I'll give you a bottle of wine for it.
Okay, we're running out of time. Let's do Jimmy.
Jimmy. Now, Jimmy, I like going first because I love talking from complete ignorance.
Yes,
There's a certain power in that.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking at Jimmy from afar, I think Jimmy is an athlete.
Yeah.
Pure and simple.
Yes.
I don't see him going home at night and reading Shakespeare.
Nope.
I don't mean he's stupid. I don't mean that at all. You got to be bright to be a quarterback.
Right.
I think his interests start and stop with football.
Sure.
I used to feel that about Joe Montana, but it turns out Joe is a chef and Joe knows all about wine. Joe turned into quite a sophisticated guy, and maybe Garoppolo will too. But I see him as a football player. I see him as extremely hardworking. I see him as really competitive, and I see him as tough.
Yep.
And I admire that. I feel he's as tough as a linebacker. And that's what got him in trouble. That's what got him hurt. Because he wants not only to take a hit, he wants to give a hit. So I admire that. Now, I'll say this. You know how I said most of the players know your name? I think Garoppolo's above that. I think he couldn't care less who the writers are because they have nothing to do with being a quarterback or winning a football game. They're you guys. I think now I could be wrong, but I think for Jimmy Garoppolo, they're you guys. Having said that, I think he's a hell of a good teammate and probably gets along very well with his teammates.
It's funny, you compared him to a linebacker, and then earlier in this podcast, we were talking about like the personality of different positions.
Yes.
He kind of has the personality of a linebacker or an offensive lineman. And I say that because he is so one of the guys. In that locker, most times quarterbacks are one of the guys, but they're not. They're equally part of the locker room and part of the front office. They make more money than the head coach, than the general manager. They're the highest paid person in the organization other than like the owner. So they can sort of fraternize with the wide receivers and the backups, but they're different. And Jimmy, unlike any quarterback I've ever seen, is able to be 100% in the camp of the players. They don't look at him like he is big league in them or big time in them, the way that I think some Seahawks feel Russell Wilson does. Like Richard Sherman can't stand Russell Wilson because I think he feels like he thinks he's better than everyone. Jimmy's not like that. Jimmy's down to earth. His dad was like an electrician. He's got a bunch of brothers. He's one of the guys. He's like a guy everyone would like in the fraternity. You know what I mean? Not the social chair or not the president, but just the guy everyone likes and it can get along with every single person, freshman to senior, which is interesting because they say a lot of times quarterbacks need to have that CEO mentality. You have to be a little bit more professional. That's not really his personality, and he seems to win a lot. So he has his own style.
Do you admire his style?
I do admire his style, but until he wins a Super Bowl, I'm not sure that it's the most effective style. And I think as he gets older, he will grow into being more of a CEO managerial type, or he won't, but I think he should.
Let's stay with this for a minute, and then we'll end it. Aaron Rodgers is a CEO type.
So is Kirk Cousins. So is Matt Ryan.
Very demanding.
Yes, very demanding, very hardworking. They learn everyone's names and kind of like presidential in the way they talk.
Brady too.
Oh, absolutely.
And so what you're saying is a certain elevation of presentation.
Yeah,
and
I am the face of the franchise. Right now, the face of the Niners franchise is Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, Richard Sherman, Joe Staley. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo isn't even a captain. He's so just like blending in, which is great. I mean, and he's the quarterback and he plays well. But I think as he gets older and gets more experience, he will have a more he should develop a more forceful personality.
Wonderful. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're running out of time. Next week we can do players from and coaches from the past, because I think that would be just as interesting of a topic. You know, it's funny. A lot of times football fans think that they're most interested in the game and how it works. But when I ever meet up with these fans at a bar or at a restaurant for lunch, the conversation always gets into, what is this player like? What is this player really like? And it goes on and on and on. So people may not realize that they're interested in this topic, but they are. And I think we can do it again with Bill Walsh, Eddie D, Joe Montana, Steve Young. What do you say?
Love it. Love it.
Well, this was fun.
This was fun. I hope to see you in person someday.
Yeah, I hope to see you in person someday too. Talk to you soon.